Hey everyone, here's the video for Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, Chapter 3, The Night Shadows. Before even starting to really go into the content of the chapter, I want to point out the idea of night shadows mentioned in the chapter title before you even get information given to you. Commonly in literature, it is known and the idea is used that darkness and shadows represent malevolent ideas and general evil and darkness. So at the very beginning, the chapter idea kind of gives a darker hint to the chapter at what may be being discussed or ideas later to come that this chapter may later hint at. Now, actually getting into the content of the chapter, very beginning, the text goes into these ideas of secrets and that everyone has one. And this is kind of interesting because we already established in earlier chapters that at this time no one can really trust anyone and that everyone is suspicious of everyone else. So the ideas of secrets and how everyone has a secret and because of that everyone is in their own way dangerous is an interesting way to start the chapter that shows how Mr. Lorry, who this chapter is mainly focused on, kind of fits that and how he feels about everyone else. In addition, the word secret alone in this beginning section is repeated 5 times, which kind of shows the importance of the idea of secrets during this text. And also, in this same section, there is the line, "My friend is dead, my neighbor is dead, my love, the darling of my soul, is dead." There's also repetition with the dead there 3 times in an almost anaphora-like style that puts stress on the idea of this person being past and a lot of people that Mr. Lorry knows being dead. And then it goes back to talking about secrets once more. Also, looking back again to that line, "My friend is dead, my neighbor is dead, my love, the darling of my soul, is dead," the way it's written and the wording would suggest that this person in relation to Mr. Lorry is the same person, because it is completely possible that someone can be a friend and a neighbor, which in this case may mean live in a similar area or places close to each other, and a lover. Especially those ideas be a friend and lover, because in many times those ideas are linked, especially in literature. And this is kind of giving insight into Mr. Lorry's character, and I'm hoping later on we get to learn more about this individual and what they mean to him. Still looking at this first section, like the main first paragraph, it's interesting to note that although we've seen that this story so far is written in a third-person omniscient sort of way, right now we're being led to believe that this first paragraph is actually being written in what is being led to seem like first person, because we are given lines that say, "When I enter a great city," and a lot of I pronouns that aren't in dialogue, meaning the narrator is saying I. So this is either another individual we'll learn more about later, because this is still centering around Mr. Lorry, or it's a choice that Dickens is taking to hone in on what Lorry is feeling, because after this first paragraph it goes back into a third style. Going into this next chunk of chapter 3, the 3 men traveling are mentioned and the mystery of them. And this goes back to the idea of secrecy that was previously mentioned, and there's this thought that none of the 3 men know the others, which leaves an infinite number of possibilities and therefore an infinite number of dangers for each of them, seen by each of them, with them traveling together as they do. Moving on to the end of the second page of chapter 3, the narrator goes into describing, with a lot of imagery, the messenger, and it says, "On the crown, which was raggedly bald, he had stiff black hair standing jaggedly all over and growing downhill almost to his broad, blunt nose." And this is just an artistic way of describing the character in a way that's very fluid. And you actually, looking at it now, there's a lot of B alliteration with the bald, black, broad, blunt that is used to describe. And that's also a lot of adjectives, which is fitting with the imagery being used. And then in the next sentence, we are given a simile, as it says, it was so like Smith's work, so much more like the top of a strongly spiked wall than head of hair, where this person's scalp and hair style is compared to that of metalwork, like a smith. The next bit of text then goes on to talk about the shadows as these people are traveling. And it says, the shadows of the night took such shapes to him as arose out of the message, and took such shapes to the mare as arose out of her private topics of uneasiness. They seemed to be numerous, for she shied at every shadow on the road. And the first thing that I notice is these idea of shadows, and again, you can tell there's something not kind and welcoming about them, which follows the idea on literary usage that shadows are not good and represent dark and evil things, at the idea of these horses being scared. And then the idea, there's one word where her is italicized to put emphasis on it, and I think it's more of in a mysterious way at the moment, because it doesn't seem as it's going to the horse. It seems as it's referring to another female who we may probably see later on. And these ideas of these shadows arising, they're almost being personified with these human traits of coming out and lurking through the darkness, even as darkness themselves. At the end of this bit, also, there is more alliteration with the she shied at every shadow. There's that sh sound. And I don't think it's an accident that, or coincidence that these alliteration words are going to shadow, because we're already seeing by the title, The Night Shadows, that there is something being shown and expressed with these shadows in this chapter. So by putting the emphasis on the sound with shadows, it's more strengthening that connection and showing that and making it, that idea flow to the readers more and stick with them, because alliteration is something that mentally sticks with people a lot, because it's a repetitive sound and repetition gets caught in people's heads. In this next paragraph chunk, there's a bit more going on than initially appears. Initially, this next paragraph seems mainly like it's about the narrator or Laurie in some way, just describing and talking about the coach ride, how it's a bit bumpy, how it's dark out, the lights are dim. But as you look at it more, you notice how it mentions the Tellson's Bank, and then how it starts comparing the coach to the bank, because it mentions the bulky bundle of opposite passengers becoming like the crowded bank and the busyness of the bank, and how the rattle of the harness was the clicking, the chink of money. And then it's mentioned that there's business going on in this coach, more so than happens at Tellson's, which there's not honestly a lot going on because these men don't want to interact with each other. So it kind of implies that they are on business or onto some important business, which is strengthened in an idea, at least, by the text going back referencing secrets again, which we saw in the beginning was a big thing. It was coming across as a theme now at this point, where the strong rooms underground Tellson's with such of their valuable stores and secrets as were known to the passenger. So Laurie knows these secrets, which may be why he was bringing up secrets, because they're weighing him down. But there are secrets happening, and they are tied to Tellson's Bank. And then at the end of the section, we get a bit of alliteration with the S sound. Safe is one of those words. It goes safe and strong and sound and still, just as he had last seen them. And that's a lot of S's, which is just a literary tool, like we've been talking about, and it's one to point out, because it's definitely a lot of S's together. From here is where things start to get a little more interesting and a little twisted and confusing, as we kind of plunge into what appears to be Laurie's inner thoughts and ideas going through his head, as all of a sudden we get the line, he was on his way to dig someone out of a grave, with almost no lead-in to any idea like that. And it's a very stark, almost morbid thing to just randomly say in the middle of a chapter without any context. And we are aware this is something he's imagining is not real, as he starts seeing faces in the shadows. And it's almost as if he's searching for the identity of this person, as if he doesn't really know, which is interesting, and something we'll probably get to know more about later. Still, though, we are supplied with the information that these faces he's seeing are all men of about 45 years old, and they all kind of have in common these ideas that they look like they have like pride, contempt, defiance, stubbornness, submission, lamentation, like kind of mixed together in his person. And we also are given imagery as the text describes them as having sunken cheeks and looking sickly and dead, as someone who's buried would look after decaying and decomposing and falling apart. Here, Mr. Lorry also starts having these conversations with these faces or people he's seeing, but we know he's only really having the conversation with himself. And we do see some interesting repetition with these conversations because he has a set layout and schematic for these conversations. He'll say one thing, they'll basically say the same thing, he'll respond one way, and they keep saying the same things. And this is interesting because it's kind of this same thing happening over and over again like a broken record, which shows that something is definitely bothering him. And the questions and answers are a little bit odd because it goes, buried how long? And then this specter answers almost 18 years. And then you abandon all hope of being dug out long ago. Which, as we see later on, is an interesting idea of being dug out and them responding, because we see at the end of the chapter, gracious creator of day, to be buried alive for 18 years. Which is an odd thing, especially since this book, besides mentioning how in the English and British side of the two cities that they do have more of a spiritual belief, which may be tied to Mr. Lorry, maybe be from that side of the two cities. But this story still doesn't seem to have a big mystical theme, so they're probably not literally someone being buried alive 18 years. It's got to be symbolic, representative of something. But this person's given up, which is interesting. Or he believes they've given up. And this, I hope you care to live, I can't stay. Which is kind of an odd response. It's not really answering the question. And then Laurie's question becomes really interesting. He says, shall I show her to you? Will you come and see her? So there is, again, this mysterious feminine character being mentioned that we don't yet know about, but this older man has ties to. Then from there, Mr. Lorry, who we're assuming is Mr. Lorry at least, mentions how from there the answer of this figure is never the same. Which is interesting because we are being shown that this figure is made up in his head. And it says, wait, it would kill me if I saw her too soon. And it says, take me to her, or I don't know her, I don't understand. And these are varying degrees of different things. One is an immediate recognition and wanting this person. One is immediate of the opposite, not wanting to go to this person. While the other is kind of in between where they want to, but it feels too soon, and they feel like if they did it too soon, something bad would happen. And this conversation keeps happening. And between them, we get a lot more repetition, similar to these conversations happening. We get dig, and dig, now. And then we get with, now with, now with. And between the next set of repetitions, he mentions digging a wretched creature out. Which, is he calling the man creature? And if so, what did he do? Because it's not, he can't be saying he's an actual creature. It's got to be saying he's kind of this horrible person, is what I'm thinking. And it's an interesting way to think, because then why would you try to be saving them or rescuing them, getting them free for whatever confinement they're in? From there, then we go back to more repetition with the real, which is interesting because we're talking about, in this whole thing is a lot of theoretical in his head, so it can't be real. He mentioned the real, which may be trying to take a spin or saying, look at a spin on this. We go back to the conversation, and there's more dig, which is tied to being buried. And then eventually, morning comes, wakes up, and he comes out of this thing in his head, and then Mr. Lorry, who we're assuming is Mr. Lorry, is actually saying 18 years, the passenger looking at the sun. gracious creator of day, to be buried alive for 18 years. This use of the word alive suddenly leaves the chapter at a cliffhanger. In a way, this being held back was the passenger's secret as well as the writer's, which we already mentioned, so it's more playing on that word, the secret, since this was knowingly held back information. Many questions are left from this, which then pushes readers on to read more. And also, the internal thoughts of the character leaves his sanity question, in my opinion, because it seems that he's questioning, in these zones where he's having these things happen in his head, that he's questioning it. And maybe it's not really a thing of questioning his sanity, but it's more of, this is something bothering him, and it's gotten to the point where it's hitting his subconscious on top of his conscious layer. And then that's where we leave chapter 3 off. And thinking back to the title name, which was The Night Shadows. So again, this whole thing happening in his head was tied to the shadows, and it's night, so it's probably something that only happens at night. That's basically where the title importance comes from. Glad it's going to be help, and looking forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday with my presentation.